just a collection of sayings, and there's no organization to it, which is not true at all. And I hope by the end of this you'll see the organization in it. But the book of Proverbs is part of what we call the wisdom literature in the Bible. It is with Ecclesiastes and the book of Job, all considered wisdom literature. And as we've gone through Sunday school and other things, I hope you see, it's just not academics to say this is the genre. The genre of a book tells us how we have to read it and interpret it. We've talked about parables that way, right? That parables, it's not about the story. Don't get lost in the story. The story is just a rudimentary illustration of the points. And so sometimes we get lost in the, well, this person's doing this and that person's doing that. That's not the point. The point is, what is God trying to teach us? What's the life lesson there? And so when we read parables, we have to read it differently than we would say read the historical, where the story is the point. All right? Well, it's the same with the wisdom literature. The Hebrew word for wisdom means more than just mental acuity. And we think when we say wisdom, this person is wise, they have a lot of wisdom. Probably the first thing that comes to your mind is someone who has a lot of book learning. Someone who has a lot of facts crammed into their head. And yet that's not what wisdom is in the Bible. You do have those facts, but it refers to actions also. This word we see for wisdom can be defined as applied knowledge or skill. So it's not just a bunch of facts crammed into your head, like we make fun of a lot of times professors in colleges. They have so many facts in their head, they can't do anything right. That's not true. Wisdom in the Bible is applied knowledge. We see this in Exodus 31. The same Hebrew word that we use in Proverbs for wisdom is used of the artisans and the craftsmen that were called out to build the temple. It wasn't just that they knew a lot about metal, or they knew a lot about gold, or they knew a lot about stitching, or any of the other things we see in the temple. It was they had experience and could actually do it, not just know how to do it. That's wisdom in the Bible. So when we look at wisdom, we're looking at applied knowledge. Now, if applied knowledge is wisdom, then what is a proverb? A proverb is defined as a short, clever saying that offers some type of wisdom. It seeks to answer two questions. What kind of world do we live in? And what does it look like to live well in that world? As we go through these proverbs, we got to understand what is the author trying to give us? What kind of world do we live in? And what does it look like to live well in that world? And so that is a basic understanding of a proverb. The purpose of the book of Proverbs is for you to have practical skills for living in God's world. What kind of a world do we live in? Well, a world that God has created, and we're going to look at that. And how do we live well in that? And that's the Proverbs should give us the skills, the practical skills to live well in that world. It's not like a law. And I think that's important because so many times we read Proverbs as if it were part of the law. The law says, God promised, if you do this, then I promise this result. That's the law, okay? That's not a proverb. A proverb is, if you desire this outcome, here is the best way to live to obtain that outcome. It's not a promise to obtain it. It's the best way to live so that that outcome comes about. Let me give you a good example that we all probably have used in our lives. There is a proverb, right? If you train up a child in the way he should go, when he's old, what happens? He will not depart from it, right? This is a proverb. It's not a promise. So many times we read that and say, well, if I train up a child in the way he should go, then God promises they won't depart from it. That's wrong because that's a proverb, it's not the law. a proverb says is, if you desire your child not to depart from God, not to depart from his ways, not to live in ways counter to how God has created him in this universe, then you train up that child in the way of the Lord. And it gives the best outcome. There are other variables that are in there that may cause them to walk away, may cause them to walk away for a season and come back. But the best chance, the best way to live in this world where our children have free will also, where our children get a vote, is to train up our children in the way of the Lord. Not like some people would say, well, I don't want to influence them. I want them to make their own decisions. So I'm just going to let them do what they want. Well, that's not a very good way to get them to know the Lord and live for him. The best way is to train him up. But at the same time, if they do walk away, if they allow influences into their lives, you can't hold God responsible for that, because he's used you to give them the information they need to live well. But they can choose not to. So I know that's hard for us parents. We'd love it to be a law where they have no choice in this. But it's a proverb. And so as we go through these proverbs, we have to understand what a proverb is and how we read proverbs. Okay? It is the best way to live given it's God's created world. All right, so that's how we're going to proceed through the book of Proverbs. Book of Proverbs, I'm not going to go through a lot of this. I thought about it. Some of you would like it. Some of you would fall asleep. It's not one big book. It's divided into 7 sections, okay? And we're going to look at that here shortly. But if you want more information on some of the background stuff, you can see me and I can give you some of that, or I can point you to different resources for that. But I don't want to get lost in the background of it. So let's jump in to Proverbs. First, we start with who is the author. And Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1 says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." You can't get more specific than that. Solomon is said to be the author of Proverbs, though he did not write every proverb. He's called the author of Proverbs because it is his wisdom literature that the other collectors or authors that we're going to find have based their Proverbs on. Okay, so he is the founder of wisdom literature. He is the base that all others copy. So he didn't write all of them, but he wrote a lot of them. A little bit of background I think is important. First of all, the leaders of Israel were commanded in Deuteronomy 17 that they should write out the law. If we had a president, what would it be like if we had a law that said every time a new president enters office, they have to take the Constitution and they have to handwrite it all out themselves? That was a requirement. Let's look at Deuteronomy 17. "And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom," talking about kings of Israel, "he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him. He shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above the brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandments, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel." So when Solomon took the throne, then he took the law of Moses and he handwrote it himself. Now, why would we want that to happen? What might be the advantages of that? Well, we're told a couple of advantages. One, so that he doesn't get the big head. It says so that he doesn't lift himself above his brothers. So as he's writing the law, he understands it is God's law, it is God's kingdom. He's simply been given the responsibility to govern under God. So one way it says to keep him humble, to understand who's really in charge. And the other reason he would write it is so that he would remember it would be his, the laws of God. And therefore, when he governed or came in contact with people, that it would be on his mind and on his heart, and he would govern well. So there's two reasons for this. I remember in college, some of the things that I took were a little more complicated. It always helped me not just to read and highlight, but to go back and write myself. Sometimes it was just notes, sometimes it was copying verbatim what was in the textbook. But the act of writing is a way of cementing something in your mind. Much more developmentally significant than just hearing somebody lecture on it. That's why lectures are some of the least information part of a college education. It's easy, it's simple, it's cheap, but people don't retain being taught to as much as doing things. That's why in like sciences, and I'm sure engineering and other places, you have a lecture course, and what else is tied to that lecture course? A lab, right? A lab, so you're doing, whatever the lecture was, you're now doing something so that it cements those principles. It's kind of like the church today. We see it as a show to come to. But really, the church is God's lab. The sermon, the Sunday school lesson may be the lecture part of it. But the church, our interaction, our caring, our dealing with one another, is the laboratory where we're supposed to put those principles from the lecture into use. That's why church is so important. That's why Christianity's had such a hard time and churches split so often, because they're not seen as the laboratory where we put the principles to use, where we practice before we have to go before the world and practice these things. It's supposed to be the church. So we know that Solomon, one of the first things he did was sit down and write out the Mosaic Law. Solomon also had these values reinforced by David. His dying father reinforced these values. In 1 Kings chapter 2, we're told, when David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. He not only had a command to write out the law, but then he had a father who, as he was taking, reinforced those values and said, Solomon, follow how God tells you to live. Follow how God tells you to rule. This is where wisdom comes from. And so we see, because of this reinforcement in 1 Kings 2 and 1 Kings 3, the very next chapter, we see Solomon ask God for wisdom to lead Israel well. The picture here is Solomon is in the high place in Gibeon. He's offering sacrifices to the Lord to purify himself, to be forgiven of sin, to purify the nation, to be prepared to lead this nation that is God's. And we see in verse 5, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, ask what I shall give you. Verse 9, he goes on to say, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? He's up. He's offering the sacrifices for himself, for the nation. He's preparing to take over leadership. And God comes to Solomon. God comes to Solomon. And he says, what will you have me do for you? And Solomon asked for wisdom, applied knowledge. how to actually guide, how to actually rule, how to actually lead the people of God in God's world. And we know God blessed it because in the next chapter, 1 Kings chapter 4, in verse 29, we're told, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind, like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. And continue on in verse 32. He also wrote 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So Solomon had been trained up, he had been guided to seek for wisdom, to ask God, tell me about the world I live in that you created, that you're in control of, and how to govern and live in it properly so that me, my house, this nation that's yours, experience your blessing and not your curses. And so that was the beginning of the wisdom literature we see. Now, what is the substance of this literature? After introducing Solomon as the author, the next verse states the book's aim, or what's the aim of this collection of Proverbs that we call Proverbs. Verses 2 through 6 tell us. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The Proverbs were written to encourage others to gain this applied wisdom of how to live in God's creation. The substance here is to know the substance of wisdom or the moral acumen, and to gain understanding or the expression of that wisdom, how to live it out. Such wise, skillful living is a life of discipleship in order. So we're given we're given actually three qualities that are part of a proverb or part of wisdom. What is God trying to tell us in the Proverbs? We're given three things that we should glean from these Proverbs as we go through them when we get to the Proverbs. And the first is to know wisdom and instruction. To know means to have personal, experiential experience. In other words, to have lived out the wisdom of God and seen its benefit. It's one thing to read the Bible and say, well, according to God's word, we should. That's not the goal of Proverbs. The goal of Proverbs is, I read the Bible and I see I should in this situation, and I do. And as I do, I experience God's blessing. And that blessing then cements that's how I should live in this world, whether the rest of the world agrees with me or not. I'm not trying to live in a way that makes the rest of the world feel comfortable. I'm also not trying to live in a way that intentionally just pokes the world in the eye. See, both of those are based on me and what I want to accomplish. A proverb tells us this is God's world. He has created it this way. And he would have his people live this way to experience his blessings. And so to understand or to know wisdom and knowledge or instruction. There's two ways I think he uses these two words, wisdom and instruction, because there's two ways for us to receive this. One, wisdom, it's giving us information so that we can apply it. But also instruction is a little bit different. Why would he use that word? Instruction usually is the discipline that comes so that we don't repeat folly. So part of Proverbs' goal, aim, purpose, is to give us the information we need to live properly, but also to give us the discipline we need when we live in a way contrary to God's way, so that then we don't repeat that mistake. We learn from it. Why do we discipline our kids? Because it makes us feel better? Don't answer that if that's true. No. We discipline our kids because they're doing something that's contrary to their good and to the good of society, and we want them to live a blessed life, all that God has for them. And so we will go out of our way to discipline them so that they don't live in a way contrary to God would have them to live. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. Second, we're told to understand words of insight. To understand words of insight. Now, understanding is a deeper meaning. It's not just to know, it's to actually understand. To understand something, you have to know it exists, but then you have to contemplate it. How many lectures did you get in college or in anywhere else where you were told something, but you didn't really put the time and effort to think about it, to wrestle with it, and it really didn't have any effect on your life? See, Proverbs is to help us to not only just know what is God's will, but to wrestle with God's will. God wants us to wrestle with his word. He wants us to really think through it, so that we can completely comprehend it. He wants us to contemplate what he's saying, contemplate the results of what he's saying. He wants us to really wrestle with the text so that we can gain the proper insight in how to live. Proverbs is to help us in these short, pithy sayings, not just to know the will of God, but to wrestle with the will of God. So that it then becomes our will. Third, we're told to receive instruction in wise dealing in righteousness, justice, and equity. We're not just to know wisdom and instruction. We're not just to understand the insights of God, but we're to receive instruction on how to apply that knowledge. And he gives us some area how to apply God's word, apply his knowledge in wise dealings, in how we interact with each other, in righteousness, in knowing what is right and what is wrong. Not what the world says is right and what is wrong, but what God says is right and wrong, living in his creation. In justice, what is justice? See, we all sometimes have our own mind of what justice is. But what is God's justice? In justice and in equity. How are we fair? How are we fair with one another? It's funny, I got some employees that are very good employees. They're very quick, they're very thorough, and they like to come in and complain about other employees. Say, well, they're not doing as much. And, I take them for their good service, their good work, and remind them that my job isn't to make everybody do the same thing, but to have the same effort. Some people don't work as fast. It's just not in what they can do. Maybe they're thinkers. Maybe they think on things longer and don't act, but maybe they make less mistakes. And so equity does not always mean the same thing. It means equitably being all that God has created us to be. And the Proverbs should help us in understanding that. And all of this, to gain knowledge, understanding, to receive instruction, so that, this is what happens, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. You give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Now, why might he say the simple and the youth? The focus of a proverb is on those who don't have, who are searching, but don't necessarily have all the information. That's why he talks about who are the simple. Those who have not gained all the knowledge or wisdom that they need. Who are the youth? Those who have not had the life experiences to have wisdom. I think of driving here. It's getting less that way. But there was a time you could say, well, yes, this person can drive. They've been through the driving course. They have all the information. They took the test. They know the signs. They know the rules of the road. And yet, many states limit where youth can drive or when youth can drive. I don't know if Texas does or not. But many states limit when certain ages can drive, even though they have their driver's license. Why? Because they don't have the experience to deal with any situations that outside of the norm. And so they may be, many states have limits where you cannot have another passenger under the age of 21. You can't pile in with all your friends and go driving the first day you get your driver's license. That wasn't a rule in Texas when I took it. I don't know if it's a rule in Texas or not. My daughter got her license in Missouri, so I don't know all the Texas rules. I do remember the day I got my driver's license. And I do remember driving my pickup, 10 and 2, following all the rules, but we didn't have the rule where a friend couldn't ride with us. And a friend who made fun of me because I didn't drive aggressive enough. What do you think happened? I said, I'm following the law, right? I started driving more aggressively. Started driving faster. I started not making good decisions. Proverbs is to help those who are don't have the experience in life to gain wisdom, to know how to live. And that's why it focuses those that are naive and untaught. It's not about those who are stupid. It's not what it's talking about. Those who can't. Proverbs isn't meant for them. And it's not about those who are fools, as we're going to find the word in Proverbs used. Someone who knows but decides not to. Because I look down on those people who drive like that. They just don't have a good control of the vehicle like I do. Or whatever the situation. It's written to those who are seeking to find God's wisdom. In verses 5 and 6, we see the expression of wisdom to the simple and muse. It says, let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. A person who understands the words or insights that are given by God through these proverbs will know how to live properly. If we're truly seeking, we're truly listening, we truly want to understand the wisdom that God has given to teach us what our world is like and how we live properly in that world, which that's what a proverb is, in a short, pithy saying. If we're truly seeking that, then we'll have a better life. If we say, look down upon that and say, I know how to live, I don't need all this stuff, then God calls us fools. Fools to think we know better than God. And trust me, there are a lot of fools in this world that would say those myths, those lack of understanding, the intellectual snobbery of those who just didn't know, they were ignorant. We have so much more knowledge now. That is why Proverbs is so important, to overcome that. Well, let's close this thing out here with what is the foundation? What is the basic building block of wisdom? We find that in verse 7. You probably all can quote it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord is the basic building block. Just like the alphabet is essential to learn to read. Has anybody learned to read and didn't know the alphabet? Maybe. I knew there was a period in education where it was all about memorization and not learning to, which is one of the reasons we homeschool our daughter, because that was ridiculous. But to learn to sound out words, you need to learn what the letters say. And when you can do that, guess what? You can gain knowledge. My daughter would come and say, Dad, how does this work? Or Dad, what do you think about this? And my standard answer, as I told her, your education isn't about you being able to quote something. Your education is about you being able to find something and come to a conclusion. And so my standard answer, which she hated, by the way, is, that's a great question, daughter. Why don't you go to the library and research it, and then we'll come back together and talk about it. She hated that. But the basic building block of getting to where she could go and research and find something out and come to a conclusion on her own was she had to know the letters, the alphabet, so that she could read. The basic ingredient of music, not something I have, is what? Notes. Do you have music without notes? Can you just come up? Maybe there's something my granddad could do, play music by sound. He could hear a song and then play it. It's just a gift. But by and large, if you want to play good music, you understand all these little scribblings over here. He's even got them circled and letters and all kinds of things. Because he can read notes. Notes are the basic requirement for the music that we just worship to. That's the basis of music. The basic of complex mathematics, even in accounting, is what? Numbers. If 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, then we don't have mathematics anymore. Which people argue now. It's ridiculous. But it's numbers. Well, with all of that understanding, what we're being told here in chapter, the basic understanding for wisdom, to understand the world we live in and how to live well in that world, is the fear of the Lord. The basic, the building block, everything mounts on the fear of the Lord. Not fear as in cowering, ooh, but fear as in respect. Fear is in honoring. Fear is in, you created. You have the right to tell me how things work. The fear of the Lord is the basis. So as we go through these Proverbs, how we have to approach them is from the fear of the Lord. God, these are pithy sayings that include wisdom because you are the one who created. You are the one with all knowledge. You are the one with truth, despite what the world says. And because I trust, respect, fear, then I take your knowledge, your wisdom, and want to make that applied in my life. So that's where we're going with Proverbs. Now we'll continue this introduction for about 9 chapters before we actually get into the Proverbs themselves. I think 9:18 is the last of this introduction. We're going to see wisdom displayed as a father talking to a son, and how we acquire wisdom and why wisdom is important. We're going to see wisdom proclaimed and personified as a woman, Lady Wisdom, speaking to us. That's all part of that introduction to help us get ready into chapter 9, when we start actually looking at the Proverbs that will give us that wisdom. All right, so hang on for the ride. We'll get there, but it may not be quick. All right, so we all have to begin with that fear of the Lord. Where are you? Where are you? Maybe you say, well, I trust the Lord, except for where science has advanced and knows better. Science knows better than the one who created. I trust the Lord, except for, that he didn't live in this time with these challenges. I think it's amazing as you read Scripture, nothing really changes. A lot of the same challenges we go through today are the same challenges that the early church went through. And that early church was one messed up church, just like we are. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the New Testament. It's important. What we're going to learn, we have to then submit ourselves to God in preparation for Him to reveal His wisdom into our lives. And we have to have faith that this wisdom is actual to be lived out in our lives. If your heart's not there, then this is the time. This is the time to say, God, I question you. I question your wisdom. I question what we are in history. Help me to have the deep, abiding trust and desire to hear you, that it would allow me to know, understand, and receive your wisdom, so that my life reflects a life that will cause you to experience your blessings and not your curses. Let's go, Lord, in prayer.